Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? Yes, I'm Kathleen Ebling Shaw. I'm here at Malmark in our ringing room. We usually are open for tours and allow groups to come in and tour and see how handbells are made, and then give them, if they'd like to, an opportunity to ring for our employees. So, and we use it for small workshops here. We're actually not open to the public during these COVID times, but it's a great opportunity to share with you. So I'm sorry I'm a little bit further away from the camera because I wanted you to be able to see the bells on the table as well as we teach, as I describe different things tonight. Maria, did you just change the screen?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. I was hoping to see everyone so when people had questions, I could see them.
I thought that only did it on mine. Yes, I did. Did that go away now?
Okay, I'm good.
Okay, sorry. I thought that only did it.
No, that's okay. So if I could have a quick show of hands, how many of you are currently working with handbells and feel pretty well versed with them? How many are new and would, okay. So my intent tonight is just to review the basics. I know that you were probably all well trained. Sometimes it's just nice to hear it again or hear a different approach as you start to rebuild your choirs. I'll be using handbells for most of the time, but I'll also address the differences with hand chimes. Could I have a show of hands? How many of you are working with handbells? And how many just work with hand chimes? And both? Okay, very good. So please feel free tonight. Maybe the easiest way for you to do it would be just to raise your hand so I know that you have a question. I have my camera a little bit further away than I normally do. So Maria, I'm going to ask if you see that someone has a question, please let me know if I don't recognize it, okay?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So I'm going to start quickly with just talking about the handbell a little bit and its function. So we have castings that are made of bronze, which is 80% copper and 20% tin. Every handbell casting is actually tuned to 2 pitches. And the reason for that is because of its bell shape. Now, when American handbells were designed in the early 1960s, Jake Malta was the designer of the Schulmerich handbell, and he later designed the Malmark handbell and started Malmark. But he gathered folks together who were using bells in the early 60s and said, you're now using European bells. What do you want American bells? Why am I reinventing the wheel? What are the things that you would like to see changed? And if you are familiar with a Whitechapel bell or a Pettit and Fritzen bell, they have leather handles. And just like a belt, overuse and being handled, the leather was getting very soft and very floppy, so it was difficult to hold the bells. Another thing, which is really excellent, is that the clapper assembly extended out of the casting. The clapper struck right on the lip, which is optimum, but we Americans didn't like our clappers extending outside the casting, so that was one of the changes. Another thing was the tuning of the bells. European bells are tuned to sound like tower bells. And it is most optimum that a tower bell has a lot of pitches in it because of its purpose. Think of tower bells. They're used to call people to worship. They're used to mourn. They're used to celebrate. They were used to let someone know that danger was in. So a tower bell has a low sound, but it has a lot of overtones in it because the higher pitches were the tones that carried over the land. So when handbells were first designed, they were meant to sound like tower bells. But in the early 60s, we started to ring handbells in chords, and all of the overtones in the bells really did not produce a very consonant sound. It was quite dissonant. And so the movers and shakers of the art of handbell ringing at that time said, could you make a bell that was more in tune with itself, so when we rang it in chords, it would be more in tune? So what Mr. Malta did first on the Schulmerich bell and then the Malmark bell is change the profile of the bell. So this is why the profile of handbells don't look like your Christmas cookie cutter or perhaps the bell that is hanging in your steeple. It's much straighter to reduce the overtones. The profile of the casting basically determines the sound of the bell. So I'm holding a C4 right now, and the C4 pitch comes from the lip area of the bell. So the lowest pitch always comes from the lip. The higher pitch or the prominent overtone comes from the waist. So you can see the diameter of this bell changes along the wall. There are different diameters in here, and you might be saying, well, what are those pitches and why don't we hear them? If we use the analogy that heavy metal creates a lot of sound, it then tells you that what Mr. Malta did is he thinned out the center of the casting so we have a prominent fundamental and a prominent overtone. I'm going to ring the bell on medium right now. And I'm damping. Can you hear a higher pitch coming through? Okay, that is the 12th in the overtone series, which would be a G5. This is C4. I jump up an octave to C5, and I count 5 steps up, C5, D5, E5, F5, and G5. So a C4 is actually tuned to a C4 and a G5. And when we pull sets here at Malmark, we make sure that the G5 handbell matches the G5 overtone in the C4 bell. So if, again, and you can hear that they are well blended. I have to admit, this is the first time I'm using handbells on Zoom. I've been doing a lot of chime work. Is the sound okay?
I think it's working well.
Okay, very good. Okay, so that's the first thing that that it's important to know, especially when we talk about damping later, that the casting produces 2 pitches. The castings are tuned at 70 degrees. Temperature will alter the tuning of the handbell, but when it goes back to 70 degrees, it will always go back into tune. So if we're going to ring down there on the plaza in Kansas City for the lighting of the Christmas tree, and it is 20 degrees out, the metal is going to get colder and more brittle, and it will go sharp. So the big thing is, if you're ringing outdoors with handbells in winter, never add a singing choir because your sopranos will not be happy. If you're ringing for the 4th of July and the castings are in the hot sun, the bells are going to go flat. But if I take them into a controlled environment at 70 degrees, they will go back in tune. The only way a bell can go out of tune is if it cracks, okay? Obviously, a bell cracks very easily if you strike 2 bells together or if you drop one. Some other reasons that bells crack is overzealous martellato, overzealous use of mallets, and again, we can't hear the center tones in the center of the casting because the wall of the casting is thin. So the lip is thicker and the waist is thicker. As a choir director, I just want my ringers to strike the right bell at the right time with their mallet, and I'm happy for it. But we have to take that a step further and make sure they're using their mallets and striking near the lip of the casting and not in the center wall, because we see a lot of bells come in where the mallet head just went right through the wall of the casting. And I have to say that the larger the bell, the thinner the center of the wall is. So a C7 has a much thicker wall area than a C3. So you have to be really careful about that, because the larger bells have more overtones because of their size. So they had to be thinned out so that the bell would be in tune with itself and then in tune with the set. Everybody good on castings? Yes? I did fail to say that I mentioned that the only way a casting can go out of tune is if it's cracked. Castings can sound out of tune within a set because handbell castings are like human voices, in that as they age, the castings develop vibrato. And so a very easy trick is to just, on the Malmark bell, is you just loosen the main assembly screw and turn the casting, and you can find a straight tone coming from the bell. So, and the reason why the vibrato develops is just that the molecules in the metal are being changed, because if you think about it, we're just feeding that metal constantly, and so it's changing the composition of the molecules in the metal. But most of the time, you can find a straight tone again on the bell. Alrighty, so we have our clapper mechanism. They're hand adjustable, or they are, they're not, they're screwdriver adjustable. But know that whatever setting you use on your clapper heads, they're not volume control, it's actually tonal control. On the felt, it just causes the lip area of the bell to be excited, and you get mostly C4. On medium, more of the bell will vibrate. And on hard, it's truly a very harsh tone because you're getting mostly overtone. We never recommend that you ring on hard unless, again, you're outdoors and you're not in freezing temperatures, because once the casting gets brittle, you don't want to have too much force striking the bell. We have the handbell handle. On one side, there's a colophon that is not on the other side, so the ringer knows how to hold their bell, because most American bells have uneven adjustment. What that means is on the ringing side, the clapper falls closer to the bell than the back side. So when I ring and then damp, I don't get a back ring. A good way, I will say that most people have their springs adjusted too tightly. And the problem with that is the ringer has to work too hard to get the bell to ring, and it's very difficult to ring at a pianissimo. So a great way to check the bell, and I'll be embarrassed because I didn't check these bells, I'll be embarrassed if this isn't properly adjusted, but a great way to check the bell is just hold it, and I'm just using 2 fingers and letting the weight of the bell let the casting drop forward. If the bell rings, it's a well-adjusted spring. If you go into church and check your bells and you just do the test and the bell doesn't ring, that means the spring is too tight. I'm at the factory, so they should be well adjusted. But so what happens if your springs are too tight? Again, you won't have the dynamic range that you have, but also your ringers will be using their wrists, working their wrists too hard, and that causes some fatigue for them. So especially with the repetitive action of ringing. So you want to be careful about that. Now, the most understated part of the bell is the hand guard, and it really does have a focus. It's really important when we ring that the bell is straight up like an ice cream cone. We don't want to see the bell ringing so the mouth of the bell is facing the congregation. We want the bell ringing in a vertical position. The reason for that is, and try it when you get back to church, pick up your largest bell. If you hold it in a vertical position, there's very little stress on the wrist. If you hold the bell like this in a horizontal position, it puts a tremendous amount of stress on the wrist, which can lead very easily to carpal tunnel. It also breaks the handles very easily. Handles can be replaced, but I'm more worried about the health of our ringers. The other reason is if we keep the bell straight up like an ice cream cone or your favorite beverage, you don't want to spill it. The reason for that is when we ring the bell, the sound comes off the wall of the casting. It's not coming out of the mouth. So if I'm holding the bell straight up, I'll get more sound out into the sanctuary. Unlike holding it horizontally, the pad is going to soak up a lot of the volume. So if you just try a great exercise with your ringers is just have them ring chords and have them ring both ways. They can feel the stress on the wrist, and that will teach them very quickly, but also you will hear wonderful sound coming into your worship space that you probably hadn't heard before. In the late 80s, there was a very popular composer and clinician who taught everyone to paint the fence, to ring like this. And that really caused a lot, there for a while, a lot of people were having a lot of carpal tunnel issues. So we've tried to get away from that. So this is about it. Let the hand guard do the work for you. If I let the bell rest on my hand with the hand guard, I never have to squeeze the handle. I don't want to squeeze the handle. I just want it to be loose in my hand so that I can flex. Is everyone good with that? Does anyone have any questions? Okay, quickly, I'm going to go to chimes. And just for those of you who use them. So the choir chimes were first developed in 1982, and then tone chimes came out and melody chimes. They're all pretty much the same in their construction. The biggest difference between choir chimes, tone chimes, and melody chimes is the shape of the tube, and there's a reason for that. But basically, it's just standard aluminum tubing, the kind used on chairs and tables. And what we do is we take that tubing and we cut the chime to a specific length on the side. If I look at the chime just like that, does that remind you of anything, any tool we use in music? A tuning fork? Okay, so what these choir chimes are is they're basically resonating tuning forks. So the only thing that decides the tuning on this chime is the length of the slot on the side. For the chime to work, both sides have to be 100% precise and equal. So the pitch comes from the size of the slot. I have an F and an F sharp here. You can see that the F sharp slot is slightly, I hope you can see, I know, I hope you have me on speaker view, but the slot on the F sharp 5 is slightly shorter than the slot on the F5. Can you all see that? Okay, so inside the tube, there's a plug, and it's placed in a certain spot based on the length of the tines so that it becomes a resonating chamber for the chime. So basically it's a resonating tuning fork. In non-COVID times, you don't have to use gloves with choir chimes. Right now, just for safe and healthy ringing, the recommendations to our art form is that everyone wears gloves and they launder them after each rehearsal. I teach at a college that's really novel to my ringers. I think they never wash them, they wear them till they fall apart. But if you can, make sure your ringers take their gloves off after rehearsal, put them in a small baggie, like a sandwich bag or something, then put them in the purse and carry them home. We worked with an epidemiologist who's a customer of ours, who's a handbell ringer, so she understands all of our practices, and she says it's really important that the gloves just aren't thrown in someone's bag, that they're wrapped in plastic and then taken home to launder. So that's one of the COVID guidelines. If you need to learn some ringing guidelines, they are on the homepage of the Malmark website and also in the news section. So there's lots of great tips on how to disinfect your instruments after rehearsal, what's important with regard to social distancing, one person on a binder, et cetera, et cetera. So if you have chimes that are out of pitch, it's probably because one of the tines is bent in. A good cause of having a chime crack is the martellato technique. So we recommend that you don't mart your chimes. Unfortunately, chimes aren't a great replacement for handbell articulations. With chimes, we can ring them, we can damp them, we can create a little vibrato, and we can finger damp. But we can't do many of the techniques that we do with handbells. If you have a chime that's in pitch, but it doesn't have any volume, it means the plug inside has slipped out of its spot, and you can send it back to the manufacturer and they can just put it in for you or put a new plug in that won't slip for you very easily. With adjustments on chimes, the clapper heads should not be adjustable. And at the base of the clapper shaft, on newer models, there's a round bumper, and you actually turn that to raise and lower the clapper head. So that's like the restraining spring on your handbell. You turn the round bumper to raise and lower the clapper head off of the tube. Okay, how we doing, folks? Any questions? Okay, good with the instruments. All right, let's talk about ringing. So I'm very proud to say that I grew up in a Catholic parish in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And when we received our handbells in 1976, we were the first parish east of the Mississippi first Catholic parish east of the Mississippi to own handbells. And I truly believe the reason for that was back when handbells became popular in this country, what had happened is a lot of the larger churches that had large bronze carillons, when they were importing their bells from Europe, basically the bell makers at that time would send along the tower bells. Maybe I bought, I don't know, 12 bells for my carillon in my church. Whitechapel would send me 12 handbells. And they were the practice instruments for the tower bells. So people didn't have to go up in the cold tower and practice and make a lot of sound for the community. They were to practice their changes on handbells. But we Americans didn't stick with that. We didn't, in the early 1900s, handbell ringing started in Boston with a set of practice bells for tower bells. And at Christmas time, Christmas carols were rung on the streets of Boston. It then carried down to New York City, and a group of ringers from the Brick Presbyterian Church appeared on the Gary Moore Show in the 50s. I have to explain to my students it'd be sort of like going on a variety show, but that's what they did. But it was because of that TV appearance, that one appearance defined what handbell ringing was in this country. Handbells were never rung in England in churches. It was always a social community thing. And they were usually rung at the pub instead of playing darts or billiards. They would ring handbells. But here in the United States, because a group of ringers from a Protestant church in New York City appeared on television, that spread the message that all churches should have handbells and start handbell choirs. And because it was Presbyterian, it was a Protestant instrument. So when our Monsignor bought our bells, a lot of the ladies were upset that he was bringing those Protestant bells into church. And about 2 years ago, when I was at NPM in Baltimore, I actually had a customer that came by and said, "Oh, what are you doing here? Those are for Protestant churches." So it's taken us a long time to say that handbells are a wonderful thing for everyone in music ministry, and it's a great way to get people involved if they don't play an instrument or they don't sing. But anyway, when I started ringing in 7th grade, I was told just make a football with the bell. And that would ring it. And I'm going to remove my necklace here. But over the years, we've changed things a little bit. So first of all, I spoke about the handbell and the hand guard resting on the bell, and I just on my hand. And I just want to have the bell loosely in my hand. So if I ring the bell, basically, I just want to bring the casting back so the clapper falls back, and flick my wrist so the bell rings. I always want to keep the bell in a vertical position. I don't want to dip it over again, because then we feel all of that stretching in the arm. So again, I bring it back and stop, and that's my ring, okay? So basically, a few of you have bells in front of you. Feel free to ring if you'd like, okay? So basically, that's the ring of my bell. And if I were ringing quarter notes, it'd be left, damp, right, damp, left, damp, right, damp. Okay, but bells are a percussion instrument, but we try to make beautiful music with them. So we have to use the arm as the breath support for the bell. If I ring a higher bell, it's easier to hear it. If I ring this bell, you can hear the spin to the tone. If I ring the bell and don't move it, it's going to die very quickly. Do you all hear the difference? So we have to, once we ring the bell, we have to move it in the tempo of the music to make the most musicality of our ringing. So what I start doing at Westminster Choir College, where I teach, is I now use the arm as a note duration type of skill. So if I'm ringing half notes, we're going to start out, because I'm teaching in my beginning choir, I'm teaching folks who've never rung before. So we're moving at a moderate tempo. And if we're ringing half notes, I'm going to use half my arm. I extend half the arm to ring. So I'm going to ring 1, 2, touch on 3, and 1, 2, touch on 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. The reason I begin with half notes is I give them 2 beats to think about what they're doing. And I will say, when we are damping at the shoulder, it is really important. Oftentimes when I travel around doing workshops, I see a lot of folks who damp like this. But what happens is you kill the fundamental, but the overtone is still ringing, so you get a lot of muddy sound. So it's really important when we damp that we touch the entire wall of the casting to our body. And that's a much cleaner damp, yes? So I start with half notes so that they can think about what they're doing, but also so that they can make sure that with self-assessment that they are damping properly. We then move to dotted half notes and we use 3/4 of the arm. 1, 2, 3, touch on 4. 1, 2, 3, touch on 4. Okay, so now I've taken it down to 1 beat. I then pull it in and have them do quarter notes. Left, 2, right, 2, left, 2, right, 2. So the shorter the duration of the note, the shorter the arm extension. So now the last thing I teach actually is whole notes. And almost everybody teaches whole notes first. I teach it at last because it takes 2 things. And think to yourselves now, how many of your ringers, when they have a whole note, do you see their whole arm go out? Usually they're ringing here and they just let the bell sit, right? We get a little lazy with our ringing. But directors, if you can tell your ladies that if they ring bells properly and extend for their whole notes, they're going to have great arms for next summer, okay? So we're going to extend 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1. So it's really important with the damping that it is very, very continuous. So as one bell rings, the other bell damps. Sometimes your ringers will give you a little bit of Baroque organ playing. Or sometimes your ringers will just smile and never damp. Okay, but damping is so important to our musicality. How we all doing there? Any questions? No? Okay, quickly on chimes. Same idea. In handbells, I use it depends what group I'm with, the ice cream cone or the glass of Prosecco, okay? But with choir chimes, we want to make sure that we hold the choir chime straight up and ask your ringers to hold them like a candle, a lit candle, and they don't want to spill their wax, okay? And the same thing happens here. We're going to bring the chime back so that the clapper falls back and we flick our wrist and move it back. Now with damping of chimes, we can't just bring the chime straight back because the clapper's in the way and it won't damp. So I have to turn out my elbow to damp the chime. Because they're straight walled, I can touch this chime anywhere and it's going to totally damp the whole entire instrument. That's a beautiful thing, okay? I cannot do that with handbells because of their shape. So chimes are much easier for children to begin with because they'll get the whole idea of damping and get that in their ear before they move on to handbells and have to deal with the overtone as well. I'll stay on handbells unless anyone has a question about chimes right now.
Quick question, Kathy. On
Sure.
the rubber, so the rubber piece on the chimes, if they were to be touched or moved or that doesn't harm them terribly?
This bumper?
Either one, the one on the top or the bottom.
Okay, so these are factory set. So they have a lot of different settings on it. It's just because we use one part for many chimes just to keep the price down. Because I will tell you, Mr. Malta, when he designed these, he never thought handbell choirs would be ringing these. He just thought hand chimes were going to be a classroom instrument. And the reason why he invented them was because he couldn't sell handbells to schools because they were too expensive. Of course, there are some schools that buy them, but a lot of schools couldn't. So he wanted to get people, he loved the idea of ringing, so he created a less expensive instrument. And he used one clapper for many chimes, but they shouldn't be adjusted. They won't turn or anything. They're on there pretty tight. The bumper should be adjusted by the director only to control the distance of the clapper head to the tube. Depending on what model chime you have, sometimes these little guys like to slide up the shaft make sure they're all the way down, and then adjust them. Any other questions? No? Okay, so how are we doing on time here? Ooh, I need to stop talking. One other thing quickly, we know that we only have 2 hands, and sometimes we have to ring more than 2 bells. And so we're going to have to use the table to help us to damp. So for instance, I have F, F sharp, G, and G sharp. My left hand, my F hand always rings F and F sharp. My G hand always rings G, G sharp, and G flat, all right? So I will use the table to help me make bell changes musically. So if my hand has to pivot between F and F sharp, I am going to do that by table damping. Whoops, sorry. Now the problem with table damping is when we're ringing, we want to keep the bells above the breast line so that the sound carries. But if I have to ring it and put it down on the table, the sound goes whoosh. So the rule in ringing is that you usually only want to table damp unless you only want to table damp when you have to make a bell change. And so be very careful, especially with melody notes, because that will really mess up the phrasing if you have a bell up here and all of a sudden it goes down. It's hard to hear with one bell, and I don't know if you can catch it on Zoom, but the sound volume of the bell goes down dramatically when it goes down to the table. Any questions on damping? Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you now, and we'll talk about assignments, okay? Sorry. Okay, can everyone see that? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. So here we have a 5-octave set of handbells. I don't know if I can get rid of, there we go. Okay, so I have a 5-octave set of handbells. We will, or chimes, okay? We are going to talk about the inner 3 octaves first. When we purchase handbell music, it's usually written for 2 to 3 octaves or 3 to 5 octaves. I would say 85% of the handbell music out there is written for 3 to 5 octaves, but it's written with a focus, okay? So usually the piece is written between C4, right here, the second space bass, and C7, the second ledger line. And that's where the core of the music is. So if you own 3 octaves, your music will sound beautiful on those 3 octaves of bells. I like to equate these 3 octaves to, I just went to the bakery and bought a cake, and it's frosted and it looks delicious, and it's going to taste delicious. But if I want it to be extra special, I may ask the baker to decorate my cake with flowers. And that is the purpose of the bells from D7 up to C8. Your upper 4th octave up to G7, then your upper 5th octave up to C8. These bells usually just double the melody or do some pretty little ostinato to make what's happening in the 3 octave set more beautiful. Okay, now I'm having a dinner party. So now, you know, my cake was delicious without the flowers, but it's really special. And now I want to give it a lot of support. The baker gave me my cake on a cardboard disc, but maybe I'll take it home and I'll put it on a platter. So now it has a strong foundation. And that's the use of my lower bells from C3 to B3. Your lower fourth octave ranges from G3 up to B3, 5 bells there. And then with chromatics here, your lower fifth goes from C3 to F sharp 3. And these bells are just used, or in really good writing, are used in chords with in an open fifth, because of that's the way the bell tone is designed to support what's going on in your inner 3 octaves. So if I had 3 octaves of bells, we're going to start at the bottom bell, C4, and everybody is assigned 2 diatonic pitches and their sharps and flats. So ringer 1 has C and D4, ringer 2, E and F, ringer 3, G and A, ringer 4, B4, C5. All notes in handbell music from C sharp 5 on down always fall in the bass staff. From D flat 5 on up are in the treble staff. So basically, et cetera, everyone gets 2 diatonic pitches going up. So I use 11 ringers with 3 octaves. The interesting thing about this is if you look quickly, everybody has a space in their left hand and a line in their right hand. So if you are teaching music literacy with your ringing instruments, you can very quickly move people around knowing that they're going to ring a space in their left and a line in their right. So maybe I started somebody out on position 1, ringing the second space and third line. I could now move them to position 7, where they're ringing the same notes, just a different clef. So that's a great way to move people around, knowing they always have a space in their left hand and a line in their right hand. As the group gets more seasoned, then we add these higher bells in, and your ringers will be ringing them 2 bells in one hand to double an octave, or they can alternate. And then what I like to do is I like to put 2 ringers down in this area. If I only had a 4 octave set, I would put 1 ringer on G, A, and B. But if I have a 5 octave set, I add 2 ringers to handle the whole octave. But I don't always assign ringer A, C, D, E, F, and ringer B, G, A, B. It depends on the music and what they can do musically. Does anyone have any questions on how those assignments are working right now? Maria, can you help me because my screen is minimized?
Yes.
If anyone has a question?
Like Vicky, do you have a question?
Oh, there we go. Okay. Hey, Kathy.
Hi.
So would you recommend that we have a 3 octave set now? Would the next purchase be the upper octave or the lower one?
Well, handbell octaves, actually, handbell sets start out with 1 octave being C5 to C6. It's very unusual that people would buy them for an ensemble, such a small set. Usually they'll just buy them for liturgical pieces. So
Okay.
when we add an octave on, we always add a half octave above and a half octave below. So if 1 octave goes from C to C, the second octave add-on is going to go down to the G and up to the G. So your even octave numbers are G instruments, your uneven octave numbers are C instruments. So now I have 2 octaves from G4 to G6, and I would assign them the same way. Because I will tell you, people who have 2 octaves are usually not so happy with 2 octaves because it ends up everything is in G major and there's not enough of a stretch to ring a lot of different types of music. I would say most people who start, and it's great to start out with 2 octaves. I would rather have 2 octaves than none. But I would say most people who start out with 2 octaves go to the 3rd octave within a year or 2. So I always like to tell people, if you do start out with 2 octaves, don't buy 2 octave music. Buy music that's written for 2 octaves, optional to 3, so you have a good investment when you move on to 3 octaves. So now I go from G4 to G6, that's my 2 octave set all the way through here, and now I'm adding my 3rd octave, I'm going up to the C and down to the C. So now my 4th octave is going to go down to the G and up to the G. And then my 5th octave will add C through F sharp, and then the G sharp through the C8.
Thank you. And the lower octave there, are those melloted or are they rung?
They're rung.
Yes.
Because there's some organizations that have bass bell consoles and they just throw the clapper. I got a little crazy over it only because I really feel like the bell needs to move in the air to sound beautiful. Okay, but here's a good example. This is a C3, bottom of the 5th octave, but it's made of aluminum. So it doesn't even, it weighs maybe like a bag of sugar, and it sounds great because bass sounds really travel well through aluminum. So if you're interested in having low bass, but you think, oh, I have all ladies ringing and they'll never be able, these aluminum bells are wonderful. This is the C3 in aluminum. And this is twice the weight. This is the C3 in bronze. You can see the size difference.
Yeah.
And you can also hear the sound difference. Bass bells produce much more overtone than they do fundamental in bronze. You can hear the higher pitch coming out, where here you get a nice strong bass tone.
Interesting. Thank you.
Sure. The only problem with those aluminum bells is the clappers do extend on them, and so you need to put them right back into the case. Does anyone else have questions on assignments? No. Okay. I'd like to go on to some sample literature, if that's okay. Okay. I'm going to stop that for a second.
Do you have any specific suggestions for ringing in COVID? Like how we're going to start this next week, and I have used the guidelines that are published by the American
Handbell Industry Council.
Yeah, and I was just wondering what if you so we're going to start with just 7. I usually have a full choir, but I'm going to just start with 7 at the most, because we can only, our church is really closed, and so we're moving to a different room and we're going to be spread out. But so I just wondered if you had any specific.
I do. Actually, for those of you who are on Malmark's newsletter list, I just wrote a newsletter today and sent it out. But if you go to Malmark's website, malmark.com, not only are the COVID guidelines on there for socially distancing, taking temperatures, wearing gloves, binders, et cetera, and how to disinfect your instruments, but there is the top news article underneath the slider, if you scroll down on the web page, is repertoire for socially distanced choirs. And so I would recommend, if you're just getting started and you have people thinking, oh, I don't know if I want to go to church in a large group and ring or not. So in this article, the first section is I included music for 8 to 12 bells. And there's a whole list of music for 8 to 12 bells. And with those bells, you can put 4 people. If you buy music for 8 bells, you can put 4 people around the sanctuary with music stands, and they can ring and be socially distanced. So if you have a 2-octave choir and you have 8 ringers, you could start 2 quartets, or maybe you could do 3 quartets, because you know, we all have that one ringer in our choir who can't get enough, and there's one that will probably love to be in a second quartet. But you can assign them different music and just start with that 8-bell music or the 12-bell music. If you have a group that wants to come together and you have a 3-octave choir, well, actually, it sounds like you have 7 ringers, so you can use a full 2 octaves of bells. The second section of that article lists all kinds of repertoire where there are no bell changes. So because if they're only ringing F and G or F sharp and G, and they don't have to make any switches with their bells, they don't really need a table. You can give them a music stand and have everybody socially distanced and ring. And then the third part of the article is for really large churches who have lots of space, and they can socially distance their ringers every 6 feet on a 3-foot table. There's a bunch of pieces listed, actually 7 pages worth of pieces that use accidentals, but the whole idea with a handbell rehearsal is if I am a ringer using F, F sharp, G, and G sharp, I never want my neighbor to touch my G sharp because I did. There should be no sharing of instruments in the rehearsal. They should just all be disinfected after rehearsal and start anew. So that's right on the front page of our website, and it's there for you. And what else do we have? So those resources are there. I guess that's about it. Did that help?
That helps. We have full marked bells, and I will check that out. So
okay, and I'll mention that in those lists, you click the red link in the article for the different lists. When the lists come up, the titles in blue take you right to our other website called Chimeworks. It's really for people who just own chimes, but that music is there and you can purchase it and digitally download it just like that. And there's on the Chimeworks website, because I really geared it for music educators, there's so many chimes in schools, and they were used very much in the 80s and 90s, but as teachers retired, the new teachers didn't come in and they don't know what to do with them. So I tried to do this website to support those teachers. And so all of the titles are linked to the website, and you can purchase the music online and it will come into your inbox, and you can digitally download it and have it immediately in 5 minutes. And it's great for all of us musicians who work at the last minute. And I'll just throw this out there to you that there's a lot of Choristers Guild resources on there. And I feel that these days, it wasn't my thought 20 years ago or whatever, but these days, Choristers Guild is probably one of the strongest handbell catalogs out there. The thing I like about it the most is she does a lot of arrangements for 2 to 3 octaves, but then has the same composer do it for 3 to 5 octaves. If you have 2 octaves and you may go on to 3, then buy 2 to 3 octave music. If you have 3 octaves and you think you're going to grow someday, I would start with 3 to 5 octave music. The problem, which I'll show you in a second about 3 to 5 octave music, is when you have beginners and there's too many notes on the staff, it gets a little overwhelming for them. So if I can, I like to start a beginning group with 2 to 3 arrangements, and then as they get comfortable note reading, then I give them 3 to 5. But Choristers Guild is doing so many what we call reproducible books, and you buy the book, which may have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pieces in it. You purchase that book for $29.95, $39.95, or $49.95, and you have exclusive photocopying rights as long as you bought that book. I love to start new choirs that are non-readers with those reproducible books because, of course, I worry about trees, but I can make all the copies I want and highlight their notes and then throw them away, and I haven't ruined a good score. Because I may go back to an easier piece because I only have 2 weeks and we have to ring on Palm Sunday, and I didn't have time to put anything together because we had a lot of snow this year. I can pull that easier reproducible book out and give it to my advanced ringers, and they'll finally not be nervous in mass ringing. They'll just ring beautifully. You know what I mean? I have an advanced choir, but I like to give them a couple easier breathing pieces. I don't think the beauty of a handbell piece is based on its level. I think the beauty of a handbell piece is based on its performance. And I get so worried that our handbell choirs just can't wait to get in to ring in mass, and all they're worried about is getting all the right notes, but it didn't matter how those notes were rung. Where if I can give them an easier piece that they feel comfortable reading, then they will think about making it more musical. Sorry, I got on a soapbox there. Is that?
No, that's good. That's good.
Okay, so here's a beginning example. This is from the book called Begin to Ring. Alrighty, and this is how I like to start my beginning ringers. They're all doing the same thing. I should have worn my reading glasses, sorry. So you'll see that mostly everyone is doing, let me go back here. Okay, here we go. Number 1, we're just starting with the harmony and everyone is ringing whole notes. If I'm the person who rings the B4 and C5, that's middle C, when I have 2 C5s without a rest in between, I don't have to damp those 2 bells. I would ring 1, 2, 3, 4, and re-ring 1, 2, 3, 4. I ring again. I finally damp that C5 on the first beat of measure 5, and then my B4 rings. I damp the B4 when the C5 rings. Is that clear to everybody? So every time you have a repeated note, you don't have to damp in between. When we're giving our ringers beginning music or getting them started up in September again, it's good to take it back and choose music that is more homophonic so that they can work together. How many of you ask your ringers to move their arms all at the same time? It makes a huge difference. If they are not synchronized in their arm motion, your bells will sound out of tune. And I'll explain that in a second. So here's the next level. I have a lot of whole notes with just the melody coming in. And then on the third example, we're going to add some more harmonic interest and rhythm. So again, this is the book Begin to Ring. It's a great resource. It's published by Hope Publishing. It is not reproducible, but this is a good investment if you have to prepare hymns and carols. It will get you through and you will always be able to use it. So it progresses along here with lots of whole notes, half notes, and quarter notes. And eventually we're going to get into pickups, Santa Crucis, and more rhythm, repeats. It just progresses along nicely, and then eventually we do come to bell changes. So that would be a good example of where to begin. Another great example is one of these reproducible books that I spoke about earlier. We're going to talk about this one here. This is called Starting Point. It's a great book to use just to get people ringing. It is available in 2 to 3 octaves or 3, 4, 5 octaves. And actually on Wednesday night, I just started our beginning bell choir at Westminster, whom I am teaching remotely this semester. So I shipped everyone chimes home. So I've loaned everybody chimes, and we've started out ringing like this. So again, this is a reproducible. I buy one book and it keeps me going, and it progresses from level 1 all the way up to level 2, and there's some techniques in it as well. Here, and again, this is for 3 to 5 octaves. So you can see if I only have 3 octaves, it's going to get a little cumbersome reading these higher notes, where if I start with the 2 to 3 octave version, sorry. There we go. No, we don't. Oh my goodness, what did I do? Here we go. This is the 2 to 3 octave version. So here's your 2 octave range from G4 to G6, and these are optional. I love the 2 to 3 octave music. Also, I had a staff bell choir at Westminster. Not everyone could come to rehearsal every week. So a lot of times, if I didn't have all 11 ringers come, I would just use 9 ringers and start it out at G and A4, but go all the way up to C7. Okay, does anyone have any questions on that? Alrighty, very quickly, friends. Do I have 5 minutes, Maria? Or should I stop? I'm sorry?
Oh, I said absolutely.
Okay, I have a whole another hour for you, friends, but I won't keep you. I'm sorry, but I hope you've been finding this useful. So Maria has this handout, so she can email it to you. But here's just a nice little spreadsheet on articulations or some workshop notes that will give you the technique, how it's used in the score. What I'm going to do is turn it off right now and just give you some quick ideas for stop sounds. Those are the most popular and the right way to do them so that you don't harm your bells. Is that okay with everyone? Okay. Good. All righty. While I'm getting ready, does anyone have any questions? If you have to go, I want to make sure I address your question. Any questions? Okay, I'll talk about the stop sounds tonight. When I'm saying stop sound, I'm talking about any sound that does not resonate. So it gives us pitch, but no sustain. So the first one ever developed in the handbell world, I'm going to bring this up so you can, I usually wouldn't pluck up here, but just so that you can see. Plucking imitates the pizzicato sound, and this was probably one of the first techniques ever created for handbells. When I pluck, I use 2 fingers. I pick up, I'm going to hold this up so you can see. I pick up the clapper assembly, then I use my thumb and twist my hand to have the clapper fall down. So again, I'm going to do this for this sound. when you pluck, I always like to bring the bells to the back of the table, especially when I'm using smaller bells, and just lean them into my legs, my body, and then the bells won't jump around for you, and you could pluck 2 bells at one time. Another way to do that would be to put a hand on one bell and pluck, but oftentimes we don't have 2 hands to do that. So if you just bring the bells to the back of the table, you'll be able to get a nice good pluck that way. Now, if I have smaller bells, it's very difficult to pluck a casting of this size. So interchangeable with the plucking technique for smaller bells is the thumb damp. The rule of thumb damp is that you put a gloved thumb on the casting and ring it. You want to make sure you don't put too much of your hand on this small casting because you'll get a percussive sound and not pitch. Okay, so I want to bring it back. So I can thumb damp. I usually stop at D5. I keep thumb damping in the treble bells. I think this is way too big to thumb damp, and my thumb doesn't damp it. I'd have to almost do a hand damp, all right? So I like to keep thumb damping in treble and then plucking or mallets in the bass. But when I get a larger bell in the treble, my bell still rings. So I'm going to have to put an extra finger on it to get a thumb damp. So remember, the rule of thumb is pitch but no sustain. Another thing that I can do is a tap pluck. And if you have we use a tap pluck, and this will all be in those notes. We use a tap pluck for 2 reasons. If we have a pluck that's meant to be pianissimo, I'm just using my thumb and tapping the clapper. So I would tap pluck a bell if it was meant to be very soft. I would also tap pluck a bell if it's a rapid pluck. So let's say the rhythm is 1E and a 2. If I was supposed to pluck that, I'd have a difficult time. Okay, but I can use a tap pluck. So that's a tap pluck, a thumb damp. The technique that we love the most is martellato, don't we? Because it relieves a lot of frustration. It's just so nice to hit something some days, all right? So anytime you get into the larger wall castings, you cannot mart them because the casting will bend, all right? So we stop marting in the 4-octave range, in G3 on up. And when we mart, we want to think about holding the bell, and I'm going to hold it over the table about 3 inches. I'm not putting the bell into the table. I'm putting my fist into the table. The reason for that is, have you ever listened to your choir's mart? The bass bells always get to the table before the treble bells, so you get a little stampede, okay? But if you tell people not to put the casting into the table, but put their fist into the table, we can do a good job clapping together because we're touching our hands. It's when we have sticks in our hand and we have to hit them, we sometimes don't always get to the beat because it's an object. So if I'm touching my fist to the table, no doubt I will do it on the beat. The other thing about martellato that's really important is that martellato is a ringing technique and not a dynamic marking. Because you're having just a wonderful little piece, and here come the marts. Boom, boom, boom. Most of the time, the marts are 10 times louder and out of balance with the rest of the piece. So I can use martellato with my fist. This is a mart. I don't know if you can hear it, but a soft mart, or that's a forte mart. But the big thing about it is when I'm using my fist, the entire wall of the casting is going into the table at one time. And so the entire wall of the casting is absorbing the blow. and you won't crack your casting. If I'm using the casting and I'm just putting it into the table, what's striking the table? The lip, right? And if you're like me, you've heard your ringers put their bells back in the cases because they never just carry 2. They carry 6 at one time in their 2 hands, and you hear. So if you run your gloves around the lips of the casting, all those little nicks are really little cracks waiting to get larger, and marding will make them larger. But if you use the fist, that will protect the casting. Okay, same thing with a mart lift, fist into the table, but I'm touching a hot iron, I'm on a trampoline, anything. All I want to do is strike the table and come right up with a mart lift. Okay, one more thing very quickly would be mallets, which is also a stop sound. The sign for a mallet is a plus sign. When it has a staccato dot over it, it means the bell's on the table and I strike with mallets. Your ringer should have 2 mallets, okay? And because mallets are so evil in cracking castings, I always recommend if you have Schulmerich bells, buy Schulmerich mallets. If you have Malmark bells, buy Malmark bells. Because if you crack a casting and they say, well, what kind of mallets are you using? You can say, I'm using yours. So that person on the end will be really soft-hearted and say, well, let's see what we can do, okay? So anyway, the first rule of mallets is that we never want to hold the mallet. Aha, because when I hold the mallet doesn't go anywhere when I strike the casting. It just beats it. So what I want to do is I want to suspend the mallet between my thumb pad and first knuckle. So I'm going to use the palm of my hand as a jumping board for this mallet. And I'm going to put my thumb pad and my first knuckle on the mallet. And now when I play, the mallet's going to come right off the bell and I'm going to get a much more musical tone. I'm striking near the lip of the casting so I don't strike in the center, so I don't crack. And I'm using 2 mallets because when I alternate, I won't rush my music. If I use 1 mallet and I'm playing 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and the gravity is going to pull the mallet head and rush the score. But if I use 2 mallets, I'm right-handed, so I'm going to play beat 1 with my right hand, so I can have pulse with my music. Instead of, okay, so that would be for mallets. If I have a plus sign without the dots, that means the bell is held in the air and struck with a mallet. If I'm the F and G5 ringer, the way I decide that is don't look at the suspended mallet section. Look at the measure after and decide whichever bell rings first, the measure after I have to play suspended mallets. I'm going to say in this particular piece, my F5 rings first. So I'm going to keep my F5 in the ready to ring position. I'm going to strike like this. And when I have to ring, I can do this and I'm ready to go. Or if I have to play 2 bells at one time, I can hold them like this and strike this way. So maybe in a couple of months we should have another session and we'll go further, but I hope that gets you started tonight, friends. I'm sorry I kept you over time. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Hey, Kathleen, I just want to thank you so much. I learned so much. I'm actually the director of my choir, but there were some things that we just needed to tune up a little bit. So I really appreciate you going through all those special techniques tonight.
Sure, it's my pleasure.
And also I want to give a shout out to my bell choir because I have 8 people on this call. So,
Wow, what you guys are dedicated. Bravo. Great job.
we're just getting ready to start back next month. So
Good. Hi, Helena?
Elena, yes. Thanks for doing this. That was really nice. I've been a choral director for my whole life, and then 3 years ago, I took over a bell choir. I have a question for you. Do you have any suggestions for us to practice without bells?
I do. So, you know, in this Zoom world right now, and we can't ring together by Zoom because the latency and the sound and everything. So I think half of the battle in bell ringing is just learning the notes. Okay. I mean, that's what most of us aspire to. Oh, do we have all the notes to learn? Can we play in worship? Okay. So half the battle is just learning your notes and learning your rhythm. So I would say I would send out a score digitally or even meet by Zoom and have everybody turn their mute button on because you won't like what you hear otherwise, and just start counting and have everyone clap their notes, okay? Then choose music that you can go on to the Jeffers website and there's a recording of it, and then have them clap their notes while they're listening to the recording.
Well, in fact, I asked my ringers to have 2 spoons and then put their notes on the spoons or their colors, whatever they want. And then we've been going over recordings that we did in the past. And then we are just practicing our notes.
If you use wooden spoons, you can write the pitches on the spoons.
Well, we put stickers. You can put stickers on your spoons. So we have now our spoon bells practice. But I wanted to learn from other people if there is any other idea.
And what I've been doing is in rehearsal, because when I count for my ringers, and we're doing a lot of classical pop stuff. So there's a lot of quick tempos, and my counting over Zoom is a half beat too late. Like they're a half beat behind me. So this is week 3, and what I did this week is I share my screen, and there's a online metronome called Metronomus, and I let them see the metronome and hear it. I share the sound because beat 1 has a lower pitch, and then 2, 3, and 4, if you're in 4/4, has a higher pitch, but also it has 4 dots so they can see what beat we're on and ring together. So that was my latest try this week. Last year we met remotely from March through May, and I had meet the composer, 2 composers a week with the choir, which was great, but they just wanted to ring. So this year, for both groups, I've sent home chimes to them, and they're practicing that way.
Thank you.
Kathy, what did you say? Oh, sorry, Elena.
I'm done.
No, that's okay. Kathy, what did you say the name of that website was? Did you say Jeffers?
Oh, for Jeffers sells handbell music, and they have a lot of recordings. I was about to say the Chimeworks website has the recordings of all the music on there as well, so you can listen and watch the score.
Awesome.
And the metronome that I found to be most effective is Metronomus. So Metronomus, the Latin version of metronome, I guess.
That's fantastic.
Any other questions tonight? No? Well, bravo to the choir that came. Bravo, and welcome to all you directors. My telephone number here at Malmark is 1-800-HANDBELL with 1 L at the end. So if you ever have any questions, directors, feel free. I'm very proud that we now have 5 Westminster grads in the building. So we have lots of musicians and lots of handbell. Well, one of them is not a handbell person, but he happened to be in the neighborhood and he works here. But so we have 4 handbell musicians here in the building that can help you with repertoire as well.
Thank you so much, Kathy. We were just so honored to have her and that she offered to do this workshop via Zoom. All of us are in Kansas City, at least I assuming so. But Kathy's not. So I think it's pretty cool, even though we're living in the world of Zoom, that we can have opportunities like this that we wouldn't have had otherwise. So
Sure.
thank you so much, Kathy.
And I'll tell you that every Thursday afternoon, beginning next Thursday, you probably don't want to join us on Thursday, September 24th, because it's going to be what you just had. But we are starting Studio 440, and every Thursday afternoon at 4 o'clock for 40 minutes, we're having a Zoom workshop for 100 people. And so there'll be a different subject. It's very gradual. You can have off this next Thursday because much of that stuff I covered tonight. But the following week will be about equipment and why we use certain things and how to set up. The following week we'll be doing bell changes, how to ring 4 bells in a row, et cetera, et cetera. We'll be taking it through. We'll be doing 4-in-hand and Shelley ringing, bass bells, bass chimes. So keep on checking our website. And we'll be happy to welcome you to those workshops as well.
That's fantastic. And pre-register for those, Kathy, on the website?
Yeah, you have to fill out in the cart, in the shopping cart. It doesn't cost anything, but it just gets you registered because we will be limited with 100 attendees for each Thursday afternoon. And I was shocked. We're probably at 50 in like 3 hours. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So again, thank you. Peace and good health to everyone.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you everyone who joined us this evening. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.